So the morning of 9/11, we were beginning to shoot a show for Animal Planet called Dog Days, and it was a lighthearted reality show about New York City dog owners, and that didn't happen because a plane was flown into the World Trade Center and then another plane. And so I said to these 8, what turned out to be very brave journalists, if you want to stay and cover this, we're going to cover it. And one of them raised their hand and said, what should we point the camera at? And I gave the best directorial advice I've ever given in my life. I said, just look at all the news crews and see where they're pointing and point your camera in the opposite direction. And that turned out to generate about 70 hours of extraordinary faces and people on the street and tears and fear. And that evolved, and I won't take too much of this time you've generously given me, but that evolved into a film called 7 Days in September, which was about life in New York in the week after 9/11. And my sons tell me that their proudest thing of the work I've done is that I got a 100 on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's available, and I would encourage you to watch it. But let me tell you why I'm here today. I've joined a program called the TED Residency, and I'm speaking to you today from the offices of the TED conferences in New York. It's a 4-month residency, and I'm working on a TED Talk, which I'll share with this group when it's completed and when it's presented. And the question that I asked is, where is the line between free speech and fake news? And to be honest, the subhead, we'll see, again, you're watching a talk as it evolves. But the subhead that I've also played with is, what if fake news is good for us? And that makes some of my friends angry, which is always the sign that you're starting a good conversation. Let me start with where I'm beginning. The year is 1983, and I'm in Moscow, and I'm with a group of college students, and I'm sitting alone, actually, with a Russian journalist on the sidewalk on the curb in Moscow, with a bottle of vodka in my hand that's mostly empty, and we're both drunk, rather seriously drunk, as it turned out the next day. And he says to me, in a rare moment of kind of, cross-global conversation, you Americans don't understand news. And I was puzzled by that, and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you believe what you read in the newspaper. He said, we Russians understand that the truth is between the lines. And that irked me, despite my inebriation. And I came back to my college radio station, where I was news director, and I had a team of 20-some reporters and journalists. And I said to them, I got this challenge given to me when I was in Moscow, and I feel the need to understand it. And I went around to the back of the newsroom and I unplugged the teletype, the Associated Press wire service, which shut off. And one of my anchors for our nightly newscast at the time said to me words I will never forget. She said to me, "You've unplugged the truth machine." So I, being something of a troublemaker in college, said, yes, well, the truth machine is shut off for the next 2 weeks. Do your job. Report the stories, call people, do journalism. And about a third of the news department quit. I've never forgotten that day. I've never forgotten that experience. They liked repeating what the truth machine had to say, and they liked rebroadcasting it, and they liked hearing their voice on the radio. But the actual work of journalism turned out they didn't like so much. So Flash forward, if you will, that was 1983. It's now 2017. What's changed for us, for all of us? You know, broadcasting, some of us in the room are old enough to remember when great big trucks and satellite dishes and reporters with big cameras on their shoulder, or videographers with big cameras on their shoulder, and roamed the earth. And that was what live television was. And today, it's this, right? Newspapers, similarly, used to be great big printing presses and very expensive hardware and delivery trucks and unions and all these things. And now, at least for some of us, printing and distribution of news is either a laser printer for $49 at Best Buy or the internet, more likely. And then last but not least, books, magazines, periodicals, which also have moved to digital. So I would argue this is a very good thing. Wonderful thing. The tools have been democratized. I said, hallelujah. More consumers are makers. Information is abundant. These are all good things, right? But the one thing I realized as I look at my conversation in Russia and my experience today is that the democratization of tools, the reduction in costs, has removed the barrier to entry that made it hard to get a message through the pipe and out the other side. And in making it not hard any longer, it's blurred the lines in ways that I think we're all finding very surprising. So I want to pose a question to all of you. When we think of what is labeled fake news, it's all really clear to us, right? We know what's fake and what isn't. So I just want to, ask you I'm going to throw out some names and you tell me where I hit fake. ABC News, fake or real? CNN, fake or real? The New York Times, fake or real? What about Fox News? What about Breitbart? Now, maybe the way I stack those questions belies my personal politics, and I think it probably does, but let me go a little further. What about Jon Stewart? What about Bill Maher? What about Alec Baldwin on Saturday Night Live? Now, the audience of the left very clearly is able to, with intellectual skill, parse Alec Baldwin's comedy and satire and get out of it what they believe is, interesting information tinged in satire. But no one would call Jon Stewart fake, except there is another whole audience of readers and viewers who feel exactly the opposite. Flip that entirely upside down. So it turns out that what we've ended up doing is calling any idea we don't agree with fake. And here's the bad news part of this talk, and then we'll get to the good news. The bad news is that's not going anywhere. That's not going away. The president can call anything he doesn't agree with fake. You can call anything you don't agree with fake. That moniker has grown so dramatically and so quickly that it's not going away. And not going away ever. Okay, so who do we blame? If we're pissed off and we think that this whole muddying of the waters and blurring of journalism has confused all of us, who do we blame? Well, there's some easy people we can blame. We could blame Facebook, we could blame Twitter, we could blame Reddit. Those are all perfectly reasonable people to hold responsible. By the way, just as a side note, if you're interested in the story about Reddit, Google Steve Rosenbaum, Forbes, and you'll see my latest post about Reddit and South by Southwest, which is worth reading. I'm going to argue that blaming those tech platforms is counterproductive. Let's look at some data, and then we'll get to some beginnings of some solutions. But part of why I'm here today is that I'm hoping you guys are going to help me find some. So there aren't really reliable statistics on what is fake and how many people are consuming fake news. There's a bunch of early research, and the Pew numbers are probably the best ones. And my apologies, I will have a slide with these numbers on them. I just don't have it yet. But according to Pew, almost a quarter of Americans have admitted that they share fake news. And a third say they often come across made-up stories, political stories. About 2/3 say the phenomenon has caused a great deal of confusion about current events. So is that good? Is that bad? Hard to say. And my Russian counterpart would probably tell you it's a wake-up call. So the way that Pew got to their numbers, they asked about 1,000 U.S. adults their opinion of made-up or inaccurate news online, and 51% of those respondents said that they often encounter political news that's not accurate. 32% said they often found news that was completely made up. So the thesis of the TED Talk that I'm working on is, A, that this is a real thing, and B, that it's not going away, and the C, which is what I'm struggling with, is maybe it's good. Maybe we're replacing fake news consumers with awake news consumers. Maybe caution and cynicism and care about context matters. So really what we're talking about is the difference between, and this is maybe the phrase that I like the best, truth versus trust. Truth is sometimes a fact, and sometimes it's an honest observation. Was the Obama administration crowd larger than Trump's? Objectively, it was. How much bigger? That depends on who you ask. So if you try to get a number on the difference in those crowds, you're not going to find one. So as more Americans are now going back to work, the Labor Department says that it is, and yet Trump supporters would say that his policies are working, and Obama fans say that's absurd. These are Obama employment statistics. Again, as much as everyone wants to put a piece of software in place at Facebook or Google or Twitter or Reddit that says fake, not fake, thumbs up, thumbs down, the truth of the matter is that in this complicated, blurry, interesting world we live in, that's going to be hard to do. So kind of in summary, fake news is a problem. We agree. But how we solve it is going to require what my Russian friend suggested in 1983, that we not kind of consume what's served to us without adding to it. So truth is more than facts. And fake news is, at its core, dishonest. We know what dishonest is about. That's when someone uses information to try and prove something that they know is objectively not true. That, I think, we can put in a box. But opinion editorial, healthy, useful, as long as it's honest about its voice and its point of view. The Onion, I would argue, is honest. Breitbart, from my review, is not. So my research is going to take us on a journey. It's a 4-month journey. I hope to speak to many of you. I'll speak to platforms like Facebook and Google, and I'll explore the thinking at universities and think tanks and think tanks. But I also will speak to readers, consumers, people who in the past have shared perhaps recklessly and now have lived to regret it. My goal is to synthesize all of this into actionable conclusions for journalists, for publications, and for consumers. And at the end of the day, what I have to do is bring back to you and my friends at RJI a new world in which we stop trying to come up with black and white definitions of fake versus not fake, and instead become more savvy consumers and more savvy creators. With that, I have no more conclusions to share today, but I will share my email address. It's steve@magnifymedia.com. And I suspect that in the audience today, there are some people that have strong feelings about fake news and some projects in the works that I don't know about and some ideas that they'd like to share. And I would encourage you to email me, start a conversation. And with that, thank you, Kim, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you all very much.
Okay, we're going to see Steve real quickly. If you have just a couple of minutes as they applaud you. Do you have just a couple seconds for a question if there is one?
Of course.
Okay, questions for Steve. Yeah.
Steve, go ahead and shamelessly talk about your books.
Well, Funny you should mention that. I have a prop. So, you know, I am one of a handful of people who claim some credit for inventing the word curation, not the museum word curation, but how it's evolved in the media. And it came to be not because I was looking to grab a word, but because I was trying to come up with this definition of the evolving space of content in which people were neither makers, creators purely, nor aggregators, which I thought of as more of a technical term. And the problem with calling people programmers is that on the East Coast, that means television, and on the West Coast, that means, you know, code. And so curator was meant to be this kind of hybrid word. The book did very well and fostered a good conversation, but I would suggest that today the word curation has been so much baked into the lexicon that it's there's little debate about the fact that part of creation of media today is curation. So proud of that book. Then I wrote a second book called Curate This, which also did reasonably well. And now I'm really focused more on the relative value of fake news to wake up the news consumer.
Very good. Other questions? Anyone? I am fascinated to hear where your TED Talk goes. I love them, and I think a lot of people do. But also the idea that this fake news may be the beginning of a positive trend. I think that gives a lot of people hope. So thanks so much for joining us from New York. And I know you wish that you had been here. We had that conversation. You just left South by, and you started this week. So good luck with everything that you're doing.
I will just say one last thing. The TED residency is such a magically wonderful environment for thinking and allow, you know, I've been running companies really nonstop for the last 20 years. And to wake up in the morning with the headspace to think about complicated questions and not have to, you know, deliver them to a client in an hour is a wonderful gift. And I recommend all of you, if you're interested in, potentially finding a place for 4 months of headspace, to consider the TED residency. So thank you all very much.
Steve, it's Kim again.
Yeah.
One more topic. Tell us what you've been doing with Senator Cory Booker and what you did at South by with Cory.
So almost 3 years ago, my company, Magnify, had kind of reached a plateau, and I was a little bored. And so I went to my board and I said, listen, you ought to get an operator to run this thing. I'm ready to go do other things. And they said, well, what if we bought a company? And I'm going to caution all of you, when people that are your board of directors say, what if you bought a company? That's a mixed blessing. That's a little like giving someone a puppy. They have to feed it. So Cory Booker, I don't know if you remember, but had started a company in Newark, New Jersey called Waywire, and it was about empowering young people to use video as a way to kind of wake up democracy. And Chris Christie had just moved the senatorial race up a year, and he was getting some heat for why he was running a startup in addition to being mayor of Newark. So his company was for sale. We bought it. We merged Waywire and Magnify together, and for 3 years had a really good, interesting run doing video curation and channels. Cory gave a talk at South by that I thought was very surprising. You know, I part of what makes him an interesting politician is he doesn't have that Baptist preacher political cadence that we've become accustomed to. He's much more warm and thoughtful, and he gave a 40-minute talk, which I blogged about on Huffington Post, again, Google away, in which the basic thesis of his talk was that the most powerful force in the United States is love. And, you know, that may sound squishy and wishy-washy to you, but whatever your politics are, he told the story of acceptance and human compassion and love with such extraordinary charm and rhythm and logic. And it was a 40-minute talk that he gave without notes and without a teleprompter. And I came away from it. I mean, I'm not going to prognosticate 2020 because I think, you know, that's way too far down the road. But for me, as a political observer and writer, he stepped up a level by not going in the mud and arguing, Trump this or Trump that. He just literally lifted the room, and the room. I mean, they obviously came to hear him, but came away pretty inspired. So I admire him, and I like that he's in the Senate, whatever his political trajectory may be.
Steve, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you.